I'm so glad that, you know what I'm saying, I even, you know what I mean, experienced this. I'm glad I experienced you from, you know what I mean, enlighten me from the internet to, you know what I mean, online, getting one-on-one in depth, giving me a lot of information that I can take back to my people as well. And hopefully we could both get the everything meshing with everything with the lineage and everything with the genealogy. This is no scam. This is all real. This is a real homeboy that put it down. He mean what he say. He got receipts and he put it down. He stands on business. Straight up. One love.
So they knew a good deal about the native peoples in the coastal areas in northeastern North Carolina, in and around the Great Dismal Swamp area, and even to the south of the Albemarle Sound, in and around the Alligator Swamp. And so they made contact with native peoples, as I mentioned before, spread disease, which ended up ravaging native communities, but they mapped villages and had some understanding of the native people. In rowing up the Roanoke River, this is a highlight of Bertie County, and to the south of Bertie County is the Roanoke River. And Ralph Lane and his expedition went up the Roanoke River. They were attacked by the Tuscarora Indians who lived in that part of Bertie County in eastern North Carolina. They had no interest in allowing the English to explore and gather intelligence about their area and about their villages. And so they attacked them and drove them back out to Roanoke Island. This is well documented. We know that they fled to the island. We know they kind of prepared for another attack, but Drake arrives, shortly after this, and he basically picks up the explorers and he releases these Africans, on the island and in eastern North Carolina, and he sails back to England with these early explorers who had really agitated the local Indians as well as devastated the local Indian populations from their spread of disease. Next slide, please. This is a recreation of the attack on Lane's expedition on the Roanoke River. Next slide, please. And these, again, the Africans that were released on Roanoke Island. Most of these Africans, as I said, between 300 and 600, regiment of 700, he created basically an African regiment. Most of these Africans were armed.
Come on, guys, let's talk about it. It's saying here in 1586, Sir Francis Drake left over 600 Africans and other maroon soldiers on the Roanoke Island. This was 33 years before the arrival of Africans to Jamestown, Virginia. So 33 years before an African slave ever came to a colony, there were free Africans living in North America. Just let that sink in. They were absorbed, y'all. They were absorbed by the coastal Indians and later the Tuscarora. So, it's interesting to understand the nuance with history. Some of us do have some African lineage. That doesn't mean we came through Jamestown as a slave. Some of us look like we are melanated and have African phenotypes, but we're Aboriginal to America. No African lineage at all. And there's other shades in between. So you really got to start with your genealogy.
They were given guns and they used their guns to fight for England. And so when these Africans were released on Roanoke Island, one of the things that we see happening is that these Africans have weapons, they have, training, and they are prepared to exist in this hostile landscape. In fact, many of these Africans were.
Yes, my consultation with Mike TV was on point. He was very thorough. He was very sincere, and he really knows what he's talking about, and he knows history. And I do feel comfortable that I met him and that I was able to do this consultation.
Maroons, what we call runaway slaves, throughout the Spanish Caribbean and throughout the Americas. And they had lived in very harsh conditions in swamps and in the mountainous areas of the Lesser Antilles and Greater Antilles and Florida. And so when they were introduced into eastern North Carolina with their weapons, they were actually given a tactical advantage over the native populations that were there. And then you have to also remember that those native populations had been decimated by diseases that were spread by the early explorers. As I mentioned in my previous presentation, wherever the English went to try to interact with and trade with the native peoples there in eastern North Carolina, they brought disease. And before they left, or as they were leaving, hundreds of native people began to die. The old, and before they left, or as they were leaving, hundreds of native people began to die. The old, the young, from different.
Damn, y'all, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure does rhyme, don't it? So back then we had Africans coming, doing war on the Aboriginal folks in America. They had a tactical advantage. Damn, that sounds like what we're dealing with modern day. We got a lot of Africans coming over here with a tactical advantage. They're getting kickstart programs and free hotel stays and free debit cards with money preloaded onto it. And what are they doing? They're trying to create havoc and destruction within the Native Black American community. And you mean to tell me back then there was also Africans doing war with and causing havoc within the Black Aboriginal community? Okay. Interesting dynamic here.
Diseases that the Europeans had brought. And this became so bad that when the native people saw the English sailing up the various waterways in eastern North Carolina to try to make contact with their villages, they abandoned their villages and they ran away. They did not want to have any contact with the English because they saw them as harbingers of death. And so when we get to the Tuscaroras on the Roanoke River, again, that is their reaction to the English coming into their territory. Not only did they not want them to explore and understand anything about their territory, but they also were very aware of the fact that they had brought disease.
And we got a cash app coming through from Serafina. Did I pronounce that right? Serafina? That's a very pretty name if I don't say so myself. Serafina, thank you for the contribution. I appreciate the support. And we've also got somebody on stage named Jay. Jay, it says your device is not connected. So as soon as you figure out how to connect your microphone, we can bring you up.
Now, this is important, and I'll move quickly. When we talk about the introduction of the Africans and the fact that the Africans are well armed, and the fact that the Africans were accustomed to living in swamps and in hostile environments because they had done so in the Caribbean, in places like Cuba, places like Puerto Rico and Jamaica, as well as Florida. So the environment in eastern North Carolina was nothing that they were not familiar with, and they certainly knew how to navigate it. And we will see that and see the impact that they have on native peoples, because as I mentioned before, many of the Indians, like the Machapungas, the Bear River, the Mattamuskeet, these Indians did not exist in the earliest maps and drawings that were done by John White of eastern North Carolina. They come into existence later in the 1600s and at the time of the Tuscarora War. And many of these native peoples basically are Black Indians, and they appear to be a Black in appearance. Many of the remnants of those Indians still exist in Hyde County and throughout East.
So for anybody who is on the fence about having Mike help you or walk you through or educating you about genealogy and the genocide that has happened with the paper trail, I implore you to reach out, allow him to educate you and assist you in this process. I have learned so much in this consultation. I feel educated, empowered, and excited for learning about my history, and looking forward to the future. So if you're on the fence, please go ahead, hit up Mike. I promise you will not be disappointed.
In North Carolina and Pasquotank and Perquimans, some have identified themselves as African Americans, others still identify themselves as Indian, and they are still, the descendants of these people are still scattered throughout eastern North Carolina. Next slide, please. This is a drawing of that voyage that we just talked about. If you look to the northeast of your map, or the right top corner of your map, you'll see a fleet of ships returning from the New World, but that fleet of ship went along the coast of Portugal, along the west coast of Africa. If you follow the line coming from England, you see the fleet in the Atlantic Ocean approaching the Lesser Antilles, the Spanish islands in the Lesser Antilles. And then, of course, you see the route that they took through the Lesser Antilles, attacking Spanish islands, attacking Spanish ships, attacking Florida, Fort St. Augustine, Florida, and then going up the coast of North Carolina, and then returning to England. On this voyage, with these African soldiers that they picked up in the Caribbean and promising them their freedom if they would fight for England, the English amassed a fortune. They took gold, they took silver, precious, all types of precious metals and precious stones. And when they arrived back in England, the wealth that they extracted from the Spanish colonies in the Americas was used by the English government to build the British Navy and basically enrich and build the British Empire and their future,
Hold
exploits
on, y'all.
in the
Hold on, y'all.
Americas.
Hold on.
So it's a story that's not
Wait a
talked
minute.
about. There's a lot.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. I got to run that back. Is he saying that Africans were contracted to work for the Spanish people and they got paid in gold, and somehow this wealth that was passed to the African soldiers somehow built up Britain's navy? What? Wait, what?
Back in England with these African soldiers that they picked up in the Caribbean and promising them their freedom if they would fight for England. The English amassed a fortune. They took gold, they took silver, precious, all types of precious metals and precious stones. And when they arrived back in England, the wealth that they extracted from the Spanish colonies in the Americas was used by the English government to build the British Navy and basically enrich and build the British Empire and their future, exploits in the Americas. So it's a story that's not talked about. There's a lot of North Carolina history and a lot of history with Native and African peoples that has been left out and we haven't really discussed. Traditionally, scholars said, well, these people must have died, when they arrived in the Americas. But as I've tried to outline for you, based on their background and their immunity to diseases like malaria and smallpox, these Africans obviously survived in Eastern North Carolina, and you can see the impact that they had on the various Native peoples in Eastern North Carolina.
Many know about slavery, but few discuss paper genocide. We did not all come from Africa, and most of us have Aboriginal roots that were stripped away due to reclassification and miseducation. As a Native Black American and a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, I understand the importance of tracing your lineage. If you want to learn how to trace your genealogy and apply for tribal citizenship, go to nativeblack.ancestry.com to schedule a consultation.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British men. Quite frankly, you was kings, Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners, raised up the children to worship their images, set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them. And this shit get way deeper than your pigment.